Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 podcast with myself, Rudy Blunt-Brown, Seb Alston and Amy Hammerslive. We've just come off the back of I was going to say thrilling Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, but that would just be a straight up lie, really. The race itself wasn't too much to write home about. However, we've still got plenty to talk about. I mean, there's crisis at Alpine, division within RB. We've got Christian Horner stuff still up in the air, and Carlos Sainz with a bit of a redemption drive for himself. But we'll delve into more specifics as the episode develops. But firstly, guys, did we enjoy the race?
It was okay. It was obviously good to just have F1 back. Yeah. And I still enjoyed it. I still found it interesting and stuff. But there was definitely a lot of hype going into it. You know, there's actually going to be a fight at the front, maybe even a fight from 2nd to 10th. You thought, there's actually going to be a fight in the race. Yeah. It just didn't materialise at all. And all the things that actually were interesting in the end were things that on any other weekend, let's face it, they wouldn't be that interesting.
Yeah. And you can see that Red Bull's way faster. Then it's probably Ferrari second fastest. McLaren and Mercedes were doing a sandwich with one another, so they can. It shows they're quite equal. And then it was obviously Aston Martin 5th. So it just showed the teams are they're in order.
Even the fight for points, there's not even that, because the difference between 5th and then the 6th and the 7th fastest teams. It's too big. Stroll literally was last, and he still managed to comfortably finish in the points. Yeah, and it's that's Lance Stroll as well. Yeah. So it's not like it's some genius midfield driver.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. It does give me not a lot of hope for the rest of the season in terms of it's going to be so hard for the lower midfield to actually score points, because the top 5 are so clear of everyone else. That's a little bit worrying in that regard. Well,
yeah, I mean, it was just 5 teams to finish in the top 10 as well, which does sort of suggest that there is a bit of a gulf within the midfield itself. I mean, obviously, Max Verstappen surged out in front pretty quickly. And then, there is definitely between Aston Martin and teams like Haas and RB, who were pretty underwhelming this weekend, it has to be said, considering the hype around them. I think it was a case of predictions were largely correct in terms of how we thought the grid was going to sort of pan out. But there was sort of particular teams like Haas. Haas was so much quicker than expected. Yeah. It was Nico Hülkenberg's pace that matched the Aston Martins, I'm pretty sure, which, despite his race position, he had a bit of a kerfuffle at the start with Lance Stroll on lap 1, just your standard lap 1, turn 1 incident, no one really at fault for that. Haas really surprising us with not a terrible package. Kevin Magnussen finishing P12 as well. But it was a lot of underwhelming weekends for many teams. We'll talk about Alpine in more detail later on. But I mean, there is, as I said earlier, a crisis going on within the French team. Obviously qualifying 19th and 20th. Not a great weekend. Not a great start to the weekend anyway. I say weekend, it was just the Saturday, which still feels really strange. And make sure to tune in to F1 on next Saturday as well, because that's when the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is for some reason on a Saturday. But Seb, you got a bit more to say about Alpine, really. You've got sort of the most fire in your belly for whatever the hell is going on in that team. So just talk to us a little bit more about that.
I mean, there's so much to delve into. There is absolutely tons to go into. Obviously, it came out after the race that the technical director, Matt Harmon, and head of aerodynamics, Dirk de Beer, it might be how you pronounce it, they both resigned, and they've both been there for at least 5 years. And it just follows a long line of people that have just left Alpine, and it sort of shows what is wrong with this team, that so many people are not even just getting sacked. Obviously Otmar was sacked.
Yeah, but people like Pat Fry and
Alan Permain. Obviously Pat Fry left to Williams and things like that. So it's and then even when you look at drivers, I was looking into it, and the amount of drivers that left, Alpine. So obviously Carlos Sainz left to McLaren in 2018. Yep. And at that point, the season before, Renault came 4th in the championship. Yeah. And then Ricciardo obviously left in 2020 to McLaren. Piastri to McLaren. Yeah. Alonso to Aston Martin. And every one of those apart from Ricciardo left Alpine to a team that actually finished below them in that year. Yeah. So it's even though they are at a team that's actually performing quite well, they can see this team is a shambles. I need to leave. Obviously, a lot of them to McLaren, which is quite funny. But it's just it's such a weird one. There's so many things about obviously the Viri and Enstone problem. Obviously Viri are responsible for the engine and Enstone for the chassis. And there were rumours last year that they weren't communicating on certain things, which is your own team. That the whole point that you're a works team, and the benefit from that is that you get to communicate between the engine department and the chassis department. They don't even like each other. Like, what is going on here? It's like, it's mental. Obviously, you know, their team principal, Bruno Famin, like, literally has had no prior experience of, like, I know he was like a director at like Peugeot or something like that before, but he's never been like a team principal in F1, which, let's face it, you know, sort of, you kind of need experience for that.
Yeah.
I know you got
for a top team.
Yeah, I know you've got to get it at some point.
Experience within the championship itself.
Exactly.
You know?
So, like, it's just such a mess of a thing. Like, the power unit in itself is like that's a whole other issue in itself. Obviously, I said about the Enstone and Very thing there, but like, their power unit is by far and away the worst power unit on the grid by an absolute country mile.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, before, like, they were partnered with Red Bull. Red Bull had their engines. That was the thing holding Red Bull back, essentially.
Yeah, definitely.
And as soon as they left them, well, guess what? Within a couple of years, they're now the dominant team in F1. So it's like, oh, great. Like, and no one else has chosen to have Renault engines.
No, they are terrible. Not only are they really slow in the straight line most of the time, the reliability. I mean, you saw Pierre Gasly last season. That Red Bull Renault was just, well, the Renault Red Bull even was so
Daniel
unreliable.
Ricciardo, I think, 2018, the amount of DNFs he had there.
So unlucky. And then just their straight line speed, they had, great pace around tracks like Monaco, but then watching them around the higher speed circuits, it was painful.
Monza was awful last year. And they're stuck with this for until 2026, because last year they actually made a request to the FIA, like, can we work on our engine? It's so bad. Can we work on our engine? And also the request that can we like have like some sort of even playing field for the engines. That didn't come true. They got denied requests to actually work on their engine. Yeah. So, even if they make step forwards with their chassis, which is another thing which we can go into about how bad that is, like that it, as you said before, that it doesn't excel in any areas. It's overweight. Like, it is just an absolute mess. And it's just...
I mean, no other, team uses their engine, but when you look at Mercedes, you've got Williams and McLaren, you've got, with Honda, you've got both Red Bull teams, Ferrari has Haas and Sauber.
Weren't McLaren former Renault customers as well, briefly between Honda and Mercedes?
Yeah, I think so.
And that was also a terrible, in terms of, particularly the reliability was really poor. From memory anyway, not quite to the extent of the sort of Alpine of now and the Red Bull of around that sort of similar time. But yeah, sorry, Amy, carry on.
No, it's just the fact that the top teams, McLaren, Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari, obviously Ferrari and Mercedes make their own, but they're clearly good because the other teams buy off them. And then McLaren and Red Bull McLaren could easily, probably not easily, but they could make an engine from their own manufacturers, and they haven't, because they probably know that they'd rather focus on other stuff. And have gone and took Mercedes, and it works for them clearly. So, and same for Red Bull, gone with Honda, going with Ford soon. They know how to work it.
The Red Bull powertrain project is crazily ambitious, but it says a lot about the state of Alpine, considering if Red Bull and Honda were to part ways and they didn't find any alternative, the FIA would enforce them to use Red Bull engines and Renault engines, sorry. And so it says a lot about how poor that Alpine engine really is if Red Bull are resorting to making their own engines themselves, which is just, it speaks volumes about just how poorly put together that car is. And I've been saying it a few times on this podcast over the months that we've been doing it now. The Alpine is sort of not a big what-if team, but they have so many false promises. It sort of all started when they managed to persuade Daniel Ricciardo to join the team. And they were saying, we'll be fighting for podiums, we'll be fighting for race wins, soon enough it'll be championships. The package that they promised him in 2019, really under-delivering on that. It was just a pretty bog-standard midfield car. The year afterwards, Daniel Ricciardo put in some amazing performances, getting the odd podium here and there, but by now, with the promises that they gave him in 2019, they should have won maybe a championship by now, or at least be in the fight. This terrible, I say, trajectory. It's been a plateau of progress for Alpine, so sort of up and down. It's a case of they can't really seem to break past that 4th/5th fastest car barrier, which, if you're an F1 team, is such a boring ambition to have, really. And when there's so much movement going on around the team, when there's, whether it's drivers or, other personnel, they're not helping themselves when they are trying to better themselves, if that makes sense. They're not making any of the right steps at all. To put it plainly, they're not doing anything right. Like it's as brutal as that sounds, and it shows with their terrible weekend this weekend. No regulation change, so they've had time to work on a car that they've had all season last season. They qualify plumb last, lock out the back row of the grid, which is something nobody wants to do. And then maybe in the race, you think they'll try and progress from that, benefit from other people's mistakes. No, they finished 17th and 18th, which is just really, really underwhelming, considering, how both drivers last season weren't too bad at all behind the wheel of that Alpine. Ocon, obviously, in the first half of the season, podium at Monaco, Gasly in the second half of that season, extremely consistent and quite quick throughout. So, it's a nightmare over at Alpine at the moment.
Go on.
No, I was comparing them to McLaren last year in the sense of starting bad and progressing. But McLaren weren't that bad even at the start last year. They were bad, but they weren't that bad.
No, not locking out the back row.
Going forward, even if they were to progress, that top 5 is so fixed.
So much quicker.
It's just too good, and they're only going to get better. It's like, Red Bull in Imola have got apparently, they want to bring forward upgrades, and that's going to take them to, I guess, to the moon. And then you've got Ferrari and Mercedes always going to be ahead of Alpine for, God, I can't imagine Alpine being that revolutionary to go above Ferrari and Mercedes, and then McLaren and Aston Martin again. They were so good last year at progressing. I know obviously Aston Martin had a downward spiral, but McLaren, they were incredible, and I think I can see Aston Martin doing the same this year, where they progressed car over season. So I just don't know how Alpine are going to fit into that.
Well, there was that feeling, sorry Seb, just very quickly, there was that feeling with McLaren last season that things are going to get better, bear with us, we are going to bring the alright upgrades. And again, no one really believed them, but with Alpine there is absolutely nothing positive coming out of the team at the moment. There's no sort of signs of any upgrades coming that will benefit the team. They're not going to have that same skyrocket progress that McLaren had last year, especially in such a quick time as well. That's just not going to happen, especially based off just reports alone. There's nothing good coming out of Alpine at the moment, whereas with McLaren there was some sort of beacon of hope. Both drivers seem very positive that the team will be able to take the next step forward and help fight for podiums and stuff like that.
It in Drive to Survive. Zach Brown just kept going on. He was like, it's coming, and it did come.
Well, I think I'm actually going to contradict basically everything you said there. And I am going to put forward a case for some hope for Alpine.
Okay.
So obviously I've said about how big of a mess they are, but there are things there that maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Right? Maybe this is a bit.
I'm intrigued.
So I've read a few points. So obviously, there is still hope that they can better understand their new concept. Like, they have taken a whole new approach, and there is obviously all the reason that they could just go back to their old approach. If they look at this new concept and they look at the data and they realise, okay, this is a dead end. They still have an okay concept from last year that they can go down, which would put them basically 6th fastest car. So I don't think it is all dead and buried. And they were the slowest team in Bahrain, right? And I don't get it wrong. Like, they were miles away. Well, I say miles. They weren't a million miles away. Like, you look at qualifying, 2 tenths away from getting into Q2, and at that stage of the season where they knew they were going to be the slowest car and they knew they were going to be quite a long way back, they were a second off Red Bull in Q1. And it's like, I know it's a second, and in the race it was a little bit bigger, but it's not the biggest. If they were like 2 seconds back, it'd be like, okay, they're really far back. It is a massive step they need to take, but that's what they've banked that they are going to do. Now, I don't actually trust Alpine. I don't think they will, but I don't know. There were rumours, I think, after testing that they are going to make a big upgrade. They are going to have a huge revamp throughout the season. I saw some people saying it's actually going to be basically the A524B. Essentially what they're going to be bringing throughout the season.
Well, that was almost what McLaren did, really, wasn't it? Yeah.
And that's obviously what they're aspiring to be like. And obviously there's always the bog standard points. They are a works team. They've got 2 decent drivers. Off track, they're doing quite well. Obviously that the fact they were able to sell 24% of the team for 200 million euros to a group of investors that includes obviously the likes of Ryan Reynolds and Patrick Holmes and things like that. So, and that is money that they are using. So I remember Laurent Rossi said about it last year that he's going to get put back into the team, and it already has done. And they've got a whole new simulator, which is like state of the art things like that. So obviously it's going to help them read into data a bit more. And the rest of it's going into their power unit development for 2026. So there is hope that because the fact they're so bad at the moment does also allow them to put all their resources into 2026. And I think that the power unit development will be going. They know they have to make a massive step forward in that regard. So they're going to put so much energy into it. They've already put obviously some of this investment into it. So
I mean, it's almost a blessing in disguise. It's a case of maybe if they are, to finish further down the championship than they would once like.
Yeah.
More wind tunnel time
Exactly.
at the very least. Maybe just sort of playing devil's advocate a bit there, but more wind tunnel time the better. Especially with their funds, they can sort of support and sustain that. Obviously, if you remember back to Drive to Survive a few years ago, Alfa Romeo had all that wind tunnel time available, but they couldn't afford it with their tight budget. Alpine, I'm pretty sure, won't have the same issue. And this isn't really, to call them a backmarker team is a bit of a stretch now.
Yeah.
This isn't quite to the same extent that we saw with Haas a couple of years ago and Williams a couple of years ago as well. They're not 2-3 seconds off the pace. They are within touching distance of Q2, which is more than you could say for Haas and Williams just a couple of years ago. And it's just a case of, it seems so monumental because this is a team that couldn't really afford to take another step back or not make any steps at all. This is a team that needed to finally break through the mediocrity wall, as it were, the mediocrity barrier, but instead they've taken a pretty big step back. So maybe that's just what's so monumental about it. A team with their budget, a team with even their drivers, a lot of people rate Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, of course. So yeah, it's just a really puzzling one because especially going into testing as well, no one pre-season testing anticipated this happening. They thought Haas would be comfortably the worst car, and Alpine would just sort of be again slap bang in the middle of the midfield. But that clearly isn't the case.
I think they could be though. I think they could be bang. The fact they've gone for the whole new concept does show there is some sort of, there are aspirations to be better than they were last year, because I think they could just be sixth.
Yeah,
they could.
I think that's what it'll be. I think it'll be.
I think they probably might end up getting back to that point, but they've taken a gamble to try and go further than sixth, and I do actually really like that from the team.
Yeah,
I know in the short term it's gonna be painful, but I'd rather them try something than just settle for mediocrity. So I kind of respect it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being too optimistic here.
But yeah, I mean, it just, to me, it seems as though it's a gamble that hasn't paid off at all. Which, respect for making a gamble, especially when they've had pretty, bog standard seasons for the last few years now. But yeah, it's just a gamble that hasn't paid off, plain and simple. We need to talk about Bahrain a bit more, though, because that's what's just happened with. I think that's enough on Alpine now before Seb sort of explodes. But yeah, as we said earlier, not a particularly thrilling race weekend. I say race weekend. It was looking promising for the race.
Yeah.
Max Verstappen shoots off into the distance. By lap 20, he's already got a pit stop on the rest of the grid, pretty much. And there was a fight for second at one point, fight for podium positions as well. We saw a great drive from Carlos Sainz just after it was announced that he will be leaving Ferrari at the end of the year, comfortably performing in the car much better than Charles Leclerc did. But let's talk about that Ferrari, because frequently both drivers were complaining about how difficult it was to drive.
Yeah.
Charles Leclerc locking up a million times into turn 9, turn 10, the sort of horrible one before the DRS straight. And then it has to be said, in the high-speed corners, their rear grip was abysmal. The car looked really, really skaty, and it looked really, really difficult to drive. Carlos Sainz likes a bit of oversteer, but that just looked dangerous. The rear grip, it was difficult for the Ferrari to get their tyres into the operating window as well. If they box onto a new set of hards, it just took ages for those tyres to light up. And then by the time they've actually got some pace in them, they're starting to wear down again. And so that Ferrari looked pretty difficult to sort of manhandle in race conditions. But obviously in qualifying, it wasn't too horrible for Ferrari. I think Charles Leclerc P2, right, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty promising stuff. And yeah, Carlos Sainz only in P4. So maybe that's a car that will do better on, well, in this case, the Friday rather than the Saturday, or, in regular cases, the Saturday rather than the Sunday. We'll just have to wait and see. But it looks as though there's issues at Ferrari that can be fixed pretty easily, if I'm not mistaken. Sort your brakes out, sort your tyre wear out. Nothing that Ferrari can't really handle, Amy. We had, division in Ferrari, I suppose, because obviously Carlos Sainz on his way out, Charles Leclerc staying there, and he was massively outperformed by Sainz in that race. Just talk to us more about that.
Yeah, no, Sainz is that sort of driver, though, where we've always seen him, prior to Ferrari, in midfield cars and proving a lot of people wrong and taking that car in his stride.
Yeah.
And he's coming to Ferrari, he's got this last chance. It was really sad seeing some interviews this weekend where he's saying, I'm not angry.
I haven't got a team for next year.
Yeah, he was like, I'm not angry, I'm just going to give my best to everyone here at Ferrari. And he did that in the first race. And I can actually... I know Charles Leclerc's my favourite, and I say he is the better driver, but Carlos Sainz is still incredible. and I can see him potentially, outscoring him in this year.
Could you imagine he walks away with,
that'd be so funny.
It would be.
And
very
imagine
funny.
Russell also outscores Hamilton. And
Yeah,
Ferrari
yeah.
stuck with
Yeah.
what looked like one of the best pairings on the grid, and they're like, can we get rid of them?
Washed, yeah.
But
no, not really, but still.
Carlos Sainz got a lot to prove as well this year. So I'm happy for him in a way that he had that sort of race and did, quite clearly outperform his teammate, because it just shows to people like Mercedes, like Red Bull, potentially the top teams, even though I do think he might go to Sauber, it does prove to Mercedes and Red Bull that he's not lost it and he still is one of the top drivers.
I mean, it was a passion-fueled drive from Carlos Sainz. Some of those moves audacious and just really well executed as well. He just seemed very tuned in on that, just in the Grand Prix setting. But yeah, nice to see such a convincing drive, towards the top end of the field that wasn't from Max Verstappen, really. We'll talk about his teammate as well, because we had some predictions and we all, did we all anticipate a torrid weekend for Sergio Perez, or did we all, was it sort of a bit of a mixed bag?
I think we all did, essentially. We all, in some way or another, predicted that he would have a stinker at some point.
Yeah, it was just Amy to predict him to finish on the podium.
And driver of the day.
Which you were correct in. And so Sergio Perez, Verstappen's teammate, another one that's sort of considered the more secondary driver in a team. Not a bad race from himself, to be fair. Decent pace throughout. I mean, obviously miles away from his teammate. Max could have probably made another stop, say if there was about 2 more laps left, and still finished ahead of his teammate. Doesn't matter anyway, because he still finished with the fastest lap. But it was just a pretty standard Sergio Perez drive, like we saw, back in 2021, where it was just really solid. There's not really much to say about it.
I mean, it was good. But it was also what you expected, because you look at the cars around him. The Mercedes had issues.
Yeah,
I know the Ferraris. Sainz didn't really have many issues per se, but it was still like a car he kind of struggled to drive with.
Yeah,
Leclerc always had his issues. So it was kind of expected from that. With that context, I know he went from P5 to P2, but he should have finished P2. He was 22 seconds off Max by the end, which is
the biggest
margin in Bahrain Grand Prix history. So it's like, I remember saying in the predictions that he's going to get a lap by Verstappen. Like, obviously, that's probably not ever going to happen. But still, it wasn't. Is it convincing? Like, if the teams actually do catch up with Red Bull, is he really going to? Can he keep up that pace?
No. Well, I mean, it wasn't exactly amazing pace anyway. Like, it was just the Red Bull was, finally tuned in. He'd got to grips with the car a bit better than last week at pre-season testing. It was fine. That's the only way to put it. It was fine. It was all he needed to do. Max finished first with the fastest lap. Checo comes in second place. Can't ask for more than that.
No.
You can't complain at all. No, but like you say, and that's always been the case. When the teams hopefully eventually catch up to Red Bull, Sergio Perez is in danger here. But we've been saying that for about a year now, and it's still not happened.
And if no one catches up, well, you might as well just keep him there. So
exactly, that's always been my argument, really. If he's putting in the performances to finish P2 in the championship, then why get rid of him?
Exactly.
If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Exactly. But maybe this year is the last year for Sergio Perez. I mean, we all predicted it.
Yeah.
I can't see it being as dominant for Red Bull this year as last. I really can't. I don't know how it can be. Do you know what I mean? But that's why I think the likes of McLaren and maybe Ferrari, even Mercedes, but are going to be fighting for that P2 in the championship. And I can definitely see Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris, maybe because it's my favourite drivers, but I can see them beating him for that P2 spot. And if they do that and the car is as dominant as we've seen in Bahrain, then how can he keep his seat for another season? It doesn't make sense.
We'll go back to qualifying briefly. I know this is a bit of a sort of jumbled up order of the video, but why not? There were some decent performances in that qualifying session. It was a bit sort of mixed up in terms of the drivers, but the teams were, they sort of spoke for themselves. But the one that you've highlighted as the winner, Seb, is my prediction for Fernando Alonso to be the start of qualifying. I mean, Aston Martin, it was... The car just didn't look very quick, did it? I mean, it was obviously in that bracket of the top 5 rather than the bottom 5, but it just... There wasn't really much to say for it. Fernando looked like a sitting duck on the straights. Any driver who had a go was able to get past. You look at even, Oscar Piastri at the start. No disrespect to Oscar Piastri, but first race of the season, this is a man that wasn't even born on Fernando Alonso's F1 debut, and he's getting past him that comfortably. Like, it's just, that Aston Martin... pretty mediocre. Although Lance Stroll did put in a really, really good drive after that turn 1 incident with Nico Hülkenberg, from going from last to 10th place. So maybe it's got a little bit about it, although that was, getting past the cars that are significantly slower than it. So it sort of goes without saying that it's going to finish ahead of the cars that are slower than it anyway.
And if Q2 went the way, if Q2 replaced Q1, me and you would have been both right, because Leclerc would have got P1.
Because he finished.
Been P2.
Leclerc recorded the fastest time of the session, didn't he? In
even
total,
faster than Max's
pole time.
I would say I'm technically right with this one. But it was a strange one, especially when Leclerc went out in Q3 with the used tyres and still was in a 10th as a second.
I know. I remember seeing that and I was like, oh, okay, when he gets onto the new tyres, he's going to be on pole, and he just was barely any quicker on the new tyres. Yeah. It was weird how everyone was like that. Like, I remember like Hamilton as well. He was also like on the used tyres, he was miles off, and then I was like, okay, well, it doesn't matter. On the new tyres, he'll be fine. He was like exactly barely improved. Everyone was barely improving, so it could have been the
track. I mean, you never know. The track evolution just didn't really seem to get any better, even though we'd had support races and support events in F2 earlier in the day. There was, I think the track itself was just pretty unforgiving this weekend. But I think I do want to talk about this wild prediction that I made about Zhou Guanyu also making it into Q3 while we're still on qualifying. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I meant the race. You know what I mean? Qualifying for Kick overall was pretty bog standard. It was pretty poor.
Yeah.
Not much separating the two drivers, but then obviously Valtteri Bottas had that horror pit stop in the race that was about a minute long, and that's not even an exaggeration. It was about 56 seconds long. And then Guan Yu Zhou went and finished P11 for no apparent reason. Like, it was just a really nice drive from Guan Yu Zhou.
It was decent.
He didn't really get much coverage time. I didn't see him do anything. It must have just been good, consistent pace throughout, no?
I saw him. I was watching him Tsunoda for quite a bit, and he was really good at defending Tsunoda. He was on fresher tyres for quite a long time. He did a really good job defending there. His pace was, weirdly quite consistent. Bottas's, though, was also quite good. Actual Sauber's race pace was decent.
Just difficult to measure Bottas's.
Yeah, because he also had, obviously, the incident at the start as well. He was also sort of caught up in that a little bit as well. But
he had damage at one point, didn't he, as well? At the start of the race. His front wing was falling off. And then, obviously, when you're that far behind, you have to move out of a lot of people's way. I mean, everyone up until and including Guan Yu Zhou was lapped in that race. So there was a lot of blue flag action, slowing a lot of people down there.
But obviously, you do also get the benefit of the clear air and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but their actual race pace was, I would say, quite promising. Qualifying pace, not promising at all. Like, it was actually a lot worse than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it was really poor.
But they look arguably quicker than the RBs in race pace, which is, I think, quite surprising. I know we said in the predictions that, we're actually, quite optimistic for stake, or kick, whatever. Yeah. But I wasn't thinking they were going to be on RB's level. I think RB's one that is like, that was a big shock in the race. Yeah. And in qualifying as well. Like, Tsunoda had a good qualifying. And Tsunoda's actual race pace was okay. But Ricciardo, it was a bit... I know he's never been really that strong at Bahrain across his whole career. But I don't know. Obviously, the things about, he's like a new Ricciardo. He's going to come back and this is his team. He's going to, really make his mark on Tsunoda.
I mean, it was certainly nothing to write home about. No. They had the team orders at the end for Ricciardo to try and overtake Magnussen. Didn't do it, even though he was on, at the time, fresher tyres that then eventually sort of fell off with the last couple of laps. But it was really strange. I mean, overtaking looked pretty difficult, especially for those in a gaggle. They haven't fixed that issue of these DRS trains. No matter how far up and down the field you are, it has to take a little bit more than just DRS to get past your opponent, which I suppose is fair.
I think I'd also say about the DRS, obviously they introduced it a lap earlier.
Yeah, I think that's in from one lap.
I think that was actually not... I was like, it's a really good idea. But when it actually in practice, it created the DRS trains even earlier, because obviously at the start of the race, you're a lot closer to everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it was closer racing.
Immediately everyone was in a DRS train. And then it was just like, okay, now it's impossible to overtake. Whereas when it comes in after 2 laps, by 2 laps, there are a little bit of distances between a couple of people. Yeah. And then maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 are within DRS. They get it after 2 laps, and then they can do it. Whereas everyone was in DRS, apart from basically Verstappen, and it was just a massive long DRS train, and it was just like, oh, okay, it's making no difference. Might as well not have DRS. So, that one's something I wasn't a huge fan of, and I thought I was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, the early introduction of the DRS certainly helped, I think, the battles towards the top end of the field, where drivers sort of, have more to fight for with more points further up, obviously. But, George Russell and Charles Leclerc pretty early on got into some decent battling. As I say before, there was a lot of good battles with the Aston Martin and Fernando Alonso. Although it was him getting overtaken, there was still really good battling going on there. The McLarens going side by side for a little bit on the first lap as well. Interesting decision to bring the DRS in earlier.
I think after restarts, I think it'll be good.
Yeah,
After
definitely.
safety cars and things like that, get it on quickly. But maybe the race start, maybe I'll be a bit too. It's like maybe okay.
It's also quite dangerous as well. Tyres are going to be fairly cold, and if you've got that
Vegas, that would be a good one where it would be. Yeah, hopefully really dangerous. Not dangerous. You know what I mean. You know what I mean.
But yeah, we'll move away sort of from it was kick we were talking about really, but we'll carry on with sort of the bottom half of the midfield. We've talked about RB Williams. Pretty underwhelming from them as well. I held them in pretty high regard going into this weekend. I thought Albon would do a pretty good job, especially in the race conditions. But I think one of the highlights of the race was Logan Sargent's brake balance surging up on the steering wheel. You said in the group chat, bring back the Tin Pot dashboard wheel, which, I mean, to be fair, first race with the new one and that's happening.
Exactly.
But and then, I mean, what happened? He sort of locked up into turn one, carried on, and then did he stall the car?
Well, I don't know. I have no idea whether he was told to stop the car or what, because obviously, if the car is changing its brake balance itself, like you can't just continue driving. That's so unsafe.
That was crazy.
But then I think he went into pits and then they changed his steering wheel, and I think it was okay.
Yeah.
But then obviously when we were watching the race, like the whole time you kept seeing on Albon's thing as well about the engine overheating.
Yeah, engine too hot in big red letters.
Too hot.
So I think obviously there's something there with Mercedes power unit. I know McLaren or Aston Martin didn't really struggle with it, but obviously Williams and Mercedes.
Lando have to take a new power unit?
He took a new control electric system, which this early into the season is worrying.
Not good, yeah.
I mean, Charles Leclerc had to take it in the second race last season because of the breakdown in Bahrain, but Bahrain. But so that's not the best start, but I didn't know if I had anything to do with it.
But yeah, no, you're right. There was overheating issues for the works team as well. I remember at one point, I can't remember who was following. I think it was Carlos Sainz following George Russell. And at one point, some sort of liquid spattered onto the camera. That's got to be some sort of engine cooling fluid that they must have lost from the car or something like that.
Or maybe some water or anything like that. They just sort of...
No,
they just got on with it. So.
I mean, and then obviously Aston Martin have had pretty poor straight line speed with that Mercedes engine since they've sort of rebranded.
Yeah.
But really interesting one with the cooling on that. So obviously, Albon with those issues and Logan Sargent with the brake balance. It looked like he stalled the car, and then they said, and they might have even said to retire the car. He was stationary for quite some time.
I thought it was going to be safety car.
Everyone was saying safety car. Yeah, it was.
But then he got going. I was like, oh, great.
Yeah, no, and then finished.
P20, he was a miles
P20,
off. I think
2 laps down from the leader. I mean, it was...
I think he had quite a few pits. That was like a very Nicholas Latifi-esque performance where
it was.
You just keep seeing, it's like, he's boxed again. What's going on? Like, what's he doing? But I guess it could be good for data or whatever. And I did obviously watch James Vowles afterwards, and he was like breaking it down and stuff. And he was like,
I'm sure there was a great explanation.
It's all stuff we can work on. And
he's really good, James Vowles.
So it's... Their actual pace itself, obviously, Albon was able to keep up with, the midfield, even with the issues.
Yeah, but he didn't really get much screen time, to be honest. I couldn't really tell you anything that happened to Alex Albon apart from the engine too hot on the big steering wheel. But Williams just pretty poor. Will they benefit in Jeddah? We'll have to wait and see. We'll talk about McLaren then. So the only sort of Mercedes team that didn't really have much issue with the engine, sort of stuck together in the race and qualifying. Really, it was positive. Both drivers looked pretty well tuned in. They were close together in pace. I get a solid weekend for McLaren. Yeah. Not really much to report. Maybe not quite as quick as they wanted to be, but it's only the first race, and there's definitely so much time to make steps forward.
And like Lando said, he said that going forward, he doesn't think Red Bull will be that strong in other races. So I do think it's hopeful, and I do genuinely believe that going into Jeddah next week. This week actually. I can see it being a lot closer, and I could see McLaren almost not fighting with Red Bull, but maybe Ferrari, and more so leaving Mercedes and Aston Martin behind. I could see that definitely happening. But no, it's positive. I'm happy, and still my world champion, Lando Norris.
Oh wow!
You can't seriously be standing by that. I have just got an F1 notification on my phone Valtteri Bottas perhaps making the most obvious point of the century in the context of his 52-second pit stop. We need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Yeah, cheers, Valtteri.
I think that could be a good idea, actually.
Excellent insight from VB there.
The strategist might need to get onto that one.
I reckon we do a 53-second one next time.
Yeah. I mean, it's not.
Better.
I mean, he's had longer. Was it the 24-hour pit stop in Monaco a couple of years ago? But yeah, and that was at Mercedes, wasn't it? So we'll talk about them now. Nice and smooth segue into that one. So yeah, issues for Mercedes like the cooling that George Russell had, which they've had for a few years now. Like Mercedes and cooling issues, particularly around high-speed circuits. I always think whenever F1 goes to Monza, Mercedes will struggle at some point with overheating issues. It seems to be as though the high-speed circuits, the engine can't quite hack it, especially in the final stages of the race as well, depending on the strategy. If they've got clear air, that doesn't really seem to make much of a difference in cooling the car down. But it was a great drive from George Russell, particularly at the start when he was fighting for P2, and then sort of, tumbled down the order to finish 5th just because the cars around him were quicker, plain and simple. But he seemed really strong. And then it was I'd say recovery drive for Lewis Hamilton. He started P9, finished P7. Can't really call it a recovery drive, but it was a more promising Saturday than it was Friday for Lewis Hamilton. So yeah, not really panic stations at Mercedes quite yet. But I mean,
it was really disappointing for me though, because I did go into it with a lot of hype, and I think everyone did after FP2. It was like, oh wow, they're actually going to bring the fight to Red Bull, and I was like, yes, my predictions, get in.
When FP2 happened, I was genuinely baffled by your predictions. I was like, no way, he's pulled a blinder.
Let's go.
Real knowledge.
I know, and then it turns out they're quite comfortably third quickest car. I mean, Toto Wolff after the race did say about it didn't reflect the W15 street pace because it was, he said they were losing 5 tenths per lap due to overheating, which is like, okay, if that is true, then okay, there is still more hope. And obviously in qualifying, Russell's actual 1 lap pace was actually really good.
Yeah.
And Hamilton's wasn't, but he said, he went around a different way, like in terms of setup to Russell, and clearly Russell's setup was better suited for qualifying, and Hamilton just made a mistake in that regard. So there's some optimism in that regard that they've learned from that. So hopefully next weekend, at Saudi, Hamilton can actually set up correctly for qualifying. And then in the race, Hamilton's pace was actually quite strong at the end. He was a bit weird at the start. He obviously saying about, the battery doesn't work. And then it turned out, no, you've just used it all, you idiot. What are you doing? But his pace on his second stint was actually really quick. So I think, there's hope there. Mm-hmm. And I think that Mercedes, it's not quite as good as I thought it was going to be, but potentially maybe they can recover and they can actually fight properly with Mercedes in Saudi. That's what I hope anyway.
Yeah, interesting stuff. No, the battery thing was really interesting. A driver with his experience really shouldn't be making that sort of misjudgment.
Even the setup and qualifying thing, like that shouldn't really be a mistake you're making.
No,
like you shouldn't just immediately, like George Russell. I know he's experienced, but like you're Lewis Hamilton, like you should know how to set up a car for qualifying. This is the man with the most races, or the most wins in F1 history. Anyway. Like you've had all of testing, you've had practice sessions as well at this same circuit, and you've got the setup.
I was going to say they've had 2 weekends there, and they're getting setups wrong. Yeah, really baffling weekend. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be for Lewis Hamilton.
He did seem very unserious in the interviews and things like that afterwards. Like, is he sort of? I don't know, just sort of knocked up. Yeah.
The only sort of thing he spoke with proper sort of, I say passion about, it was a case of, every race will feel like a farewell this year with Mercedes. Yeah. But that was it, really. There wasn't, like you say, a little more
joking
unserious.
Around,
No, it's a sort of side to Lewis Hamilton that we've not seen for quite some time.
It's nice to see him like that, but at the same time, like, you do need to be a competitor.
I'd also like him to win our race with Mercedes one last time. But my highlight was George Russell going off and making that mistake, and then Charles Leclerc finally passes him because he was really struggling, Charles. And then eventually it was just like Singapore, he just went off.
Not quite to the same extent though.
He didn't crash out.
Yeah, before we run out of time in the studio, let's react to our predictions that we made before the race weekend. So we've gone over a few of them, and we're introducing a new leaderboard system. So based on how well we do with our predictions before every race weekend, we'll tot up the points that sort of get delegated per correct prediction, and then at the end of the year, someone gets a pat on the back or something like that. We haven't really discussed the prize.
Yeah. I found it so funny on your video that you did that I never really gave a reason for mine, so you were just like,
I was trying to explain your predictions, but they weren't quite as mental.
Elaborated a bit more, but I found it funny. You're trying
to think of reasons.
Of course, she's gone for Charles Leclerc.
So our man on pole position, Seb and I both both predicted Verstappen. We both get a point. We both get a point each for
Well
that.
knowledge.
Shockingly, I know. And Amy predicted Charles Leclerc, so no points for Amy so far.
Was
So
the
it's
fastest? Was the fastest?
so it's 1-1-0 at the moment. Star of qualifying. Now, I mean, considering there isn't really one like sort of objective way to decide this, Seb, I take it you just sort of did.
I just said whoever's sort of done the best, I'll give
Who's
them
the
a point for it.
fastest?
I mean, it's fair.
We can obviously change it.
Out of the three, yeah, we can always debate this as well. Out of the three, so I chose Alonso, which won me the points. Amy said Piastri and Seb said Stroll. Out of the three,
Piastri was boring.
Yeah.
Stroll was 12th, and Alonso
was way ahead of his teammate.
So I think,
and then sort of fell off a bit in the race as well. So it's clearly, that car is a lot quicker round one lap. So flop of qualifying. I said Sergio Perez, did not get any points for that. Seb said Oscar Piastri, so directly contradicting Amy's star of qualifying. And Amy won a point for Esteban Ocon. Out of the three,
I
mean,
could have
obviously
only gone better if it was Pierre Gasly.
Yeah,
I thought it was contentious between Perez and Ocon, because obviously Perez, I know he came 5th.
Yeah,
but he shouldn't be coming 5th.
It wasn't great. It wasn't great. Whereas Ocon actually did outperform Gasly. It was actually quite close to Q2. So it's actually an okay performance from Ocon. It's just, I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't think any of them will actually be massive flops. It's just obviously the team Alpine were flops.
No, exactly. I mean, who was the flop of qualifying really? Could you say Lewis Hamilton, I think? Maybe for the flop of qualifying?
I think I'd say Lewis Hamilton.
Huge gap to his teammate and, just about scraping into Q3. He got into Q3.
But P9.
P9 is not where you want to be.
For a car that actually had the potential to arguably, compete with Ferrari.
Yeah.
And the Ferrari was able to compete with Red Bull. Like, come on. Hamilton, you should be doing better than that. So I think he was,
Yeah, I mean, with Sergio Perez as well, we've seen a lot worse from him.
Exactly.
So I think there will be performances this season in qualifying sessions that will warrant the flop of quality award. But I think, we'll give it to Esteban Ocon. And just to return back to the star of qualifying, we say Nico Hülkenberg, objectively, out of the ones that we didn't pick,
He's unlucky in Q3 not having the fresh tyres to actually go for it.
Exactly. Well, that's Haas for you, really, isn't it? So of the podium sitters, point scorers were myself and Seb. I said Verstappen to finish first, Leclerc to finish second, which obviously did not happen as that was Checo Perez, and Carlos Sainz to finish third. I was the only one to predict a Sainz podium.
Yeah.
So I predicted a Red Bull win and then Ferrari 2-3. Amy didn't get any right.
No, I did get Perez on the podium though.
You did get Perez on the podium.
If I actually weren't being delusional.
And Verstappen on the podium as well.
If I weren't delusional and I could move them up and go first, second, and then put Leclerc third,
you could have got a couple points.
Well, could have got 2 extra points.
If your aunt had balls and whatnot. So and then Seb predicted Verstappen to win, shock, horror, and then Hamilton and Russell, because obviously your sort of bold Mercedes
I thought
prediction.
Russell was going to be good, but then obviously he fell off as well, so it's just like, okay, great.
Driver of the day. Let's ignore mine with Alex Albon. The less said about that, the better. Just an underwhelming weekend for him and for Williams. Amy, you said Sergio Perez. I mean, it was a fine drive.
It's pretty basic reasons. He qualifies low and then he can work his way through the race because no one's got the same race pace as him.
Carlos Sainz was the official winner of Driver of the Day, if I'm not mistaken. I agree with that. I think he did deserve that. Seb, you said Piastri, so out of the three, Perez probably did have the best drive. Not really much debate there. And then Amy, again, on a roll. Alex Albon, flop of the weekend. So Seb said Perez, I said Hamilton. Out of
this
the
was
three,
a contentious one,
there is debate for Hamilton.
That's what I thought. It was Hamilton or Albon. It's definitely not Perez, which is annoying.
But there was progress in the race for Lewis Hamilton. And I suppose there was for Alex Albon, but it wasn't.
It was because of Sargent and Bottas.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, literally just Bottas who fell off. So
and Hamilton was decent strategy, good pace. Just worked well after a poor Friday. Amy gets the point for Alex Albon there. So as it stands, it is 1-1-1-1-1. So I'm on, what's that? I don't know why I didn't count upwards. I'm on 5 points. Amy,
you're on 4.
Huh?
So far,
it's 4-3-2.
We've not predicted best team yet. That's why. 4-3-2 to what? Me, Amy, you? Is that okay? Yeah. This is so hard to keep on top of. But best team. Amy and I both said Ferrari. That's the last points we scored.
Yeah, other than Red Bull. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
Objectively, it probably was Red Bull. But then Seb, you predicted Mercedes. So of the two teams, everyone predicted Ferrari did have a better weekend. So that's a point each for myself and Amy. And then our shock predictions.
None of us got a point for
None of us got a point for them because they were just too shocking to happen. I said Zhou Guanyu Q3. I was kind of close because he finished P11 in the race, but I won't. Okay. Well, I should have just been more vague with it and said Joe Guan Yu to have a good weekend.
Yeah. And then you might have got a point.
Yeah. Perez not to make Q3 didn't happen. Finished P5 in the end on Friday, and then an Alpine double DNF. To be fair, when I was thinking of my shock prediction, a double Alpine DNF did cross my mind. I mean, stranger things have happened. Stranger double DNFs have certainly happened.
It might as well have happened.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter if they were
exactly.
there or not.
No
so.
points scored, no pace at all. So yeah, no, I mean that was so as it stands right now. Well, if Seb, I'm sure you'll sort of bring a fancy leaderboard up onto the screen. I'm on 5 points, Amy's on 4, so nice and close at the top, and then Seb on 2. But there'll definitely be some. You'll make that back. It's just the first weekend.
I'm happy because of my delusions. If I'd just gone with my brain and not my heart, I'd be ahead. But you know what? It is what it is.
But we're grateful for that because it gets us views. So there we go. And then just to round out this podcast episode, I've been seeing this trend on TikTok. Right, it's called it's called survival, I think, in some cases, but you might know it as don't say the same thing as me. Just a bit of fun to end the podcast. So I've got 5 rounds of just general F1 trivia which have multiple answers. If you say the same answer as me, then you are eliminated from the game. You've got Seb and Amy to play along with you. They don't know my answers for this. They don't know the questions. This is all completely and utterly verbatim. So let us know how you get on in the comments. Let us know where you got eliminated. Let us know if you didn't get eliminated, what answers you put down for each one. It's just occurred to me I've got 4 here and I've not got 5. The 5th one must have deleted itself. So let's go with 4.
I just hope I get the answers.
Yeah.
So 4 general trivia rounds. And if you say the same thing as me, you get eliminated. I have written it down as well, so I'm not doing any cheating to try and screw anyone over.
Okay.
And the first one is a British World Drivers' Champion throughout any time in F1 history. There's a lot to choose from. I believe it is the most World Championships for a nation in F1 history. Might be wrong on that one.
That
but
is right.
Yeah, so you've got plenty to choose from. Recent, old, and in between.
Okay.
Have you both got one?
I think I know what he's going to go for, but that's why I'm going to go with it.
So, I mean, you've both got to say yours first.
Yeah.
Amy, who have you gone for?
Lewis Hamilton.
And who have you said, Seb?
Jenson Button.
So you've both gone with the 2 most recent ones. If you said Lewis Hamilton, the most successful driver in Formula 1 history, you are safe from the game.
I thought it too obvious, so I went with it.
If you said Damon Hill, you remain in the game. Unfortunately, Seb, Jenson Button is who I've got down here, the 2009 F1 World Drivers' Champion.
I knew you were going to go for that. That's why I did genuinely think that.
Okay, Seb. So for the sake of inclusion, let's keep you in the game.
Okay.
But you can't win. You can't win. So you can still play along. Yeah. So number 2. Can you give me the name of any Spanish F1 driver in Formula 1 history?
Oh, no.
Carlos Sainz. You might overthink this one. You might not. You're going to go with Carlos Sainz as your answer. Seb, have you thought of any?
Was Pedro de la Rosa, was he Spanish?
Pedro de la Rosa was Spanish.
Okay.
I think I'm going to...
Pedro de la Rosa was the one that I've got written down. I promise you.
I've just seen
God, no, I didn't
see anything.
Well, Seb's out the game. Seb's out the game.
What of 2 for 2?
So Seb's 2 for 2. If you said Pedro de la Rosa, you're out of the game. The pre-season testing maestro. Number 3. Any current team principal. You might overthink this one. You might go and play it safe.
Oh my God, Mike Crack.
Fred
Vasseur. Well, this time you're both in.
I knew what you put.
If you said, obviously you knew what I put. But if you said Toto Wolff, you're out of the game. Arguably the most sort of, I suppose, popular one. And then finally, I would like you to give me a circuit/country that has hosted an F1 sprint race, please.
Okay.
Baku.
Austria.
Azerbaijan.
Amy, you are the winner of the game. If you said Interlagos or Brazil to those watching, you're out of the game. Interlagos was the answer. But Amy, well done.
Thank you.
The inaugural ShefF1. Don't say the same thing as me, and we have a winner. Let us know how you got on in the comments. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see more of that as well, because I've been obsessed with those videos on TikTok at the moment. That's all I've been watching. And let us know if you got eliminated as well. But I think that's about time. Yeah. That's everything. Join us later this week at some point where we will preview the upcoming Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. No matter how you've consumed this content, we do very much appreciate it. Don't forget to click follow or subscribe depending on how you're watching or listening to this. Once again, thank you so much for watching and listening. And see everyone later.
Bye.
Bye.